Hi, everyone. This is Tom and Jesse Talk Movies. I am Jesse.
I'm Tom.
Uh, Firstly, if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to contact us at csprograms@cshlibrary.org. This is Guillermo Del Toro month. Tom, I know you're a little bit more familiar with him than I am. I've only seen a couple of his films prior to Cronos, which we watched for the first time. Came out in 1993. His first feature film,
Yes.
Guillermo Del Toro, and I think that was something that kind of intrigued us both.
Yeah.
He's got a very distinct visual style, very cool aesthetic, so I was interested in it. For those of you who are unfamiliar, as I was, Cronos it's kind of a blend between a foreign film and an American film. I mean, you have Ron Perlman, the actor, featured very prominently in it. He speaks a lot of English, but the main protagonists speak Spanish.
Yes.
And I thought that was kind of a neat little feature because it blends together well. It didn't seem like it was...
It would make sense considering it's a Mexican film.
Right. It takes place in Mexico. So this is about an antique dealer who comes across a very interesting relic that has the ability to grant you eternal life.
Yeah.
So the antique dealer himself kind of stumbles across this, and he inadvertently kind of has this device attached to him, and it kind of starts sucking his blood, oddly enough. But he realizes as the film progresses that it does grant him eternal life. The antagonist of the film comes in because he's been searching his whole entire life for this device that grants you eternal life. The antagonist is terminally ill, and he's looking to cure himself of his many maladies. So you have the protagonist and the nephew of the antagonist, rather, Ron Perlman, who's kind of this enforcer, this hitman type, who's tasked with getting this device back so he's able to get eternal life for himself. So that was the kind of the gist of the premise. I'm curious to know what you had to think about it first, because I have my own thoughts and they're not overwhelmingly good. So
so I did not like the film at all. And Guillermo Del Toro is an interesting director. He's very well liked. He has a big fan base. He's a director that I always say he's a director that I want to love, because I think visually his films are great. Not so much Cronos. I didn't think this one had really any visual flair to it. But he's known for his art direction and combining elements of horror, gothic horror, and fantasy, which is cool. I'm not a huge fantasy person, but you throw elements, dark elements, horror. I'm down for that.
Absolutely.
So there are two films of his that I actually really love, and then the rest of his films, like, he's somebody that I always try to go and watch his movies, just because I like the way they look, and I'm always hoping, I might like this one. And so I loved, he did a film in 1997 called Mimic with Mira Sorvino and Josh Brolin.
Yep.
I love that one.
Giant cockroach, right?
Yes, it was sci-fi, horror-ish, and it was about Mira Sorvino is the scientist, and her company invents some sort of disease or plague that's affecting children. So she invents some sort of, I think it's a cockroach or something that kills the disease.
Yes.
And then I forget the exact.
It starts like mutating uncontrollably.
Yeah, so it's like they were supposed to like stop the disease, the bugs, and then die off, but they don't die off. And
cool setting, takes place in New York City.
Yeah. So that I really am a fan of. I grew up watching that. I think it's
New York
great.
City, right?
Yeah. And then in 2004, he did Hellboy, which is kind of like the superhero, action-y, comedy, horror-ish. It has a bunch of elements. But again, I really like that film because I find the character of Hellboy, played by Ron Perlman, legitimately funny and interesting. And the movie has a lot going for it. Just the first one I like. I didn't care for the sequel. But so that was really good. And because I like those movies so much, I always try to check out Guillermo del Toro's other films. And I just never like them. I find them to be great concepts, and very boring. Like I saw Crimson Peak. I thought that was very boring. But great cast, takes place in this beautiful mansion, and I'm bored to tears.
Okay.
And Shape of Water with Sally Hawkins, that got a lot of Oscar buzz, and she was nominated, and he actually won Best Director, which I was very happy about because I think he's an excellent director. I just am not on board with his executions. Didn't care for Shape of Water. Again, very boring and very out there and a little too ridiculous for me.
Any interest in Nightmare Alley, which is his newest feature?
That's one that like I'll probably see on DVD. That particular film, like I don't like half the cast in this. I like Cate Blanchett, no doubt, but like Rooney Mara is in it, and Bradley Cooper, and
doesn't do much for me.
They don't really do anything for me, especially I'm not a fan of her. Her
and you're not really.
Style.
It's kind of like film noir. I know that's not.
I'm not a big film noir person, but whatever. So I'll probably see that on DVD just because his name is attached to it, and I have no expectations. But always hearing about Cronos, that it is it's his first film. I'm like, well, let me check it out. And yeah, I didn't really care for it, and I was surprised at how much I didn't like it. And it's my exact issue with him is in this movie. I find him to have cool ideas, although the idea of an antique dealer, eternal life, that's not really interesting to me. Okay. I like things that are more, I'm not huge into fantasy. I tend to like movies that are more grounded in reality. But yeah, like I'm a fan of like Matrix, Lord of the Rings. I think that stuff is good. I'm not saying it has to be realistic to enjoy, but like this is a plot where I'm like, it's so, I don't care. It would be like to me, it's a taste thing. It would be like watching a movie about voodoo. Like I don't believe in it. I think it's silly. I'm not going to get on board with it. So, but okay, I watch it, and I appreciated that it was, a lot of spoken Spanish dialogue mixed with English dialogue, and that was cool. And but the movie was just a total excruciatingly boring. And absolutely. I felt that this could have been a short. I feel that we have a very simple subject, and even though the movie's like an hour and a half, it felt so long, and I'm like, what? I feel that there was not enough movie to fill out the runtime. So I'll leave it there.
It's funny. I'll lead off with that because I feel the same exact thing, and I checked the runtime before I started watching it.
Yeah,
and
I was very like,
hour 35 minutes,
like, this
a nice
great.
tidy hour 35 minutes.
Yeah.
And it was like one of those movies where I constantly found myself kind of just looking at my watch to be like, is it still going on?
I remember I paused it to get up for a minute, for a minute, and I come back. I'm like, I'm 29 minutes in. That's it.
Right. What's interesting is, so in comparison, you and I had just this is kind of tangential, but the newest Matrix film just came out. So Tom and I, in anticipation of that film, had been going back and rewatching the original trilogy. The first Matrix movie is about 2 hours and 19 minutes. And the reason I bring that up is because it's so interesting and there's so much going on. It was a breeze of a film. I never once felt like, oh my gosh, this is going on too long. Cronos in particular, I felt like it just went on way too long. See, I took the opposite approach that you did because this subject matter interests me. I do like that fantasy aspect. I do like the aspect of eternal life. And you have this opposing force who then wants to take this device and he wants eternal life. That's always something that's kind of interesting. But I think that it was a little bit clumsy in its execution in that there was so much stress on building characters, which I'm ordinarily all for. But there wasn't a whole lot in the...
not a lot of substance.
There wasn't a lot of substance to it. I mean, I guess, again, the emphasis is on the family structure itself. You have this antique dealer who's living with his granddaughter. He's living with his wife, and they're featured very prominently. And then you have this kind of zany, almost Three Stooges type material with Ron Perlman's character. He hates his uncle, the uncle who's really looking for the device to steal it from the antique dealer. And there were some funny moments. Did you find any of that? No.
No.
Okay. Ron Perlman is the comic relief. And there are times where he's switching between Spanish and it's this very clumsy sort of, he's just this oafish sort of character.
You continue and then I'll give you my opinion. Sorry.
Yeah, so he's this bungling, oafish sort of character, and he's entrusted with stealing this device from the antique dealer. He does not want, he's waiting for his uncle to kind of kick the bucket. There was so much of that, and I didn't find that particularly interesting. I didn't find there to be a tense struggle between the antique dealer and Ron Perlman. There were so many moments where Ron Perlman, being this huge, imposing figure, could have done anything to get this device back, and it feels like you're further inflating the runtime by him just not ripping it out of his hands.
And there's not much else going on.
You said it perfectly. This movie had the makings maybe for an interesting short film. I could see this being a half an hour tops. I don't think that you needed to flesh it out for an hour.
Right. No, I agree. This could have been like an Are You Afraid of the Dark or X-Files episode, not even a good one. But,
right. And again, my experience with I was going to say Ron Perlman, with Guillermo Del Toro is far more limited than yours was. But I saw Blade 2 in theaters. I saw Hellboy and Hellboy 2. And again, it was that there is always a very compelling visual aesthetic. I haven't seen a lot of his other horror films, The Orphanage, Devil's Backbone, which we're going to watch.
We're going to be discussing that next.
Pan's Labyrinth, I know, is one that's very popular.
Yes.
Too.
Yeah, I did see Pan's Labyrinth.
What I find to be very gripping about whether it's Hellboy or Blade 2, it's the visual stuff. And I felt like, to his credit, he would later go on to refine them. But there's just nothing really exceptional about the way that it was shot. There's nothing exceptional about the direction.
Yeah, it's not even like a particularly pretty looking movie either. No. It's a lot of like yellows and oranges and like, it's very evident that it's low budget. And it doesn't have to be a flashy visual fest. So that's not even, a big critique of mine. But I'm like, we don't even have that, which I always look for. No matter, like, I did not care for Shape of Water, but his the setting, when you're underground, when you're in these science labs, I'm like, this is just beautifully shot. He plays with a lot of color, and I love that. And the setting itself, I think, could have been very interesting, where it takes place in Mexico. Yeah. But the settings that you get, it felt like New York City. It's a warehouse. It's the protagonist's house. I liked his apartment. The apartment was cool. And you have the dealership, but there are so few settings. And again, maybe it's budgetary reasons, what the constraint was. You had this sprawling Mexico City to shoot in, and you just gave us this very limited view. Yeah, it is quite limited. Anything nice to say? Was there anything that you liked about it? To touch upon some of the things you said, like what stood out to me was I did like the main character's relationship with his wife and granddaughter. So that was good. He wasn't anything interesting as a character, but I liked that, he's becoming obsessed with this artifact, and it's having such it's changing his body, and he is becoming younger, and his wife notices it. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But I like how he kept it a secret from them. So that was cool. That stood out. Yeah, the granddaughter character, I liked his relationship, the conversations he had with her. That felt authentic. Right. But Ron Perlman I love him in Hellboy. I like him in Alien Resurrection. Even in Blade 2. Yeah. In this, he feels like a fish out of water, and maybe some of that's intentional, but even so, it's just, I didn't think his acting was particularly good. I didn't either. He played like comical, but in a cringeworthy kind of way. Like they were just trying too hard for life. Yes, absolutely. And there's really, like, other characters, we don't really focus on anybody else, and there's a bit of violence in the film that, okay, I appreciate, like, practical effects. But I felt that this was slightly influenced by some of the films of David Cronenberg, who has done stuff like Videodrome, and he does a lot of what's called body horror, which is when the horror film, it focuses on like somebody's like physical, like body changing, like they're growing something or so forth. And that's one of the few subgenres of horror that I'm not really into.
And my biggest problem too, and I think I almost was misled. I maybe misled myself, but when I looked up this film and I saw that it was categorized as a horror film, I had a very different conception, I guess, of what this horror would be. I there was really no element of horror. Okay, maybe there's violence. Maybe he is becoming, increasingly more disfigured and is. But there was. You're right. There are elements of body horror, but even that, in my limited Cronenberg experiences, Cronenberg did it so much better.
Oh, of course. Guillermo is more of like, see, it's one of those, is he a horror director or he's not? Like, yes and no. I can understand arguments for both. He's somebody that he takes elements of horror in the sense that his settings and his production design, the art direction is ripped right from a horror film, but the story isn't really meant to be scary or suspenseful. Kind of like what Tim Burton does, but yet for a younger audience, where it's like, oh, they're living in this really creepy house, but there's no like vampire that's going to jump out at you. Mimic is more suspenseful and horror than most of his stuff. The Orphanage, I actually saw in theaters, and I really liked it. It's been a long time since I've seen it. It's from 2008, but he was only an executive producer on it. So I remember when that came out, his name was plastered all over the advertisements, like, oh, Del Toro presents. And then you see the credits, and you're like, oh, okay. Totally influenced by his stuff.
Did he write it? Did he write the... No,
I don't think so.
No. Okay.
But like, he did Crimson Peak, which that was the one with, you remember Jessica Chastain and Tom Hiddleston.
Yes.
Saw that in theaters, and I'm like, all right, like you want to talk about a runtime. That movie feels long, and when it ends, I'm like, okay, that's it, whatever, I don't care.
And that's one of the toughest parts about movies. Like, if it lacks that level of immersion for me, if I feel myself coming out of it and like looking at my watch, that's
I don't want to be taken out of the movie. I can appreciate that as a director, he tries to pull you into his world. He's all about setup, but I'm just not liking what this guy's selling.
And to your point, I do like the relationship between the granddaughter, the grandfather, but it just doesn't. You're right. There's no substance. There's
nothing to really grab onto here.
The conflict. I wasn't really so much interested in any of the conflict.
I didn't care enough about the lead character to care. I wasn't interested in like, oh, he's going through all these physical changes. I don't care.
Right.
I liked the opening of the movie, like how it opened in like the 1500s. I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm kind of on board. This is going to be cool. And then I slowly went down.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
So I feel like this is a movie for somebody who's into like old, like gothic horror, slow burn type of stuff. You don't have to be into scary or suspenseful stuff to like this movie, because it doesn't have either of those things.
Right. As long as you can accept a little bit of blood.
Right. So
otherwise, really disappointed actually.
Yeah. So. I didn't know which way I would go on this, because like I say, he always gets my money. I always get back, he always gets me back in the theater because his ideas are cool, but end up just not being into it. So.
All right. Well, hopefully the next one will be better for the next
I hope so.
Film.
I had tried back in high school to watch Devil's Backbone. Obviously, my taste has drastically changed since then. I used to have like no attention span, but I remember watching like the first half hour of the film, and I never finished it.
Oh, don't tell me that.
You
tell me that after. You tell me that after I watch it, not before.
And that was like 15 years ago.
Okay.
So
still
I'm hoping I get something out of it. We'll see.
Okay. Maybe you'll make it 40 minutes this time.
We'll see.
All right. So I think that's all we got for this time. If you have any comments or questions, again, please contact us at csprograms@cshlibrary.org. And I look forward to talking about the Devil's Backbone with you next.
Yeah. All right.
Take care.
Yeah.